expect and what is trending. Let's have a look at still what is trending, but in terms of the CS Aden Duale when it comes to the book that he has launched. And this morning he was having an in-depth conversation with our sister station, that is Spice FM, what the book entails, why he decided to write the book, and why he mentioned some senior politicians in that book. So cruise over and listen into that interview.
Here is the book, Aden Duale's For the Record, the inside story of power, politics, lawmaking, and leadership in Kenya. Good morning, Waziri.
Morning, good people.
Welcome to Kenya's biggest conversation. Asante sana for joining us and for coming to share with us about this. I mean, yours has been the headline in the last 2 days on the Standard.
Yes.
Today's is this one, how Kalonzo goof cost him the presidency. So let's talk about
The one
that
of
book.
yesterday made me, I did some sales.
Yeah. Yesterday's.
So I hope today again I'll do it. It was very interesting. At least the forward of the president was captured yesterday.
Yes. The president gave you the forward for this particular book.
Yes.
He's written actually 3 pages, 1, 2, 3, 4, no, 5 pages of the forward by His Excellency the President. And it talks about your journey together in politics up to this particular point that you've gotten. Let's talk about that. First, CT is not in, but this week, CT, due to public pressure, he said today, this week's proverbs are from Somalia. And so
from Somali language.
Yes.
Somalia, you know, is a country.
Yes.
Yeah,
From Somalia, the country.
Yes.
He said it's because we do African proverbs.
Oh, okay.
Proverbs from across Africa. So today's proverb, I'm going to say it in English, and then you can say it in Somali, because I'm sure you understand the language.
Yes.
A liar calls as witness one who is either dead or far away. A liar calls as a witness one who is either dead or far away. Say it in Kisomali.
I think it's a very good proverb. It says, Ben low, nintinte, yenin der, ayu markati kadikta. Ben low, nintinte, yenin der, ayu markati kadikta. Meaning that, you know, this character called liar, he has disturbed people. Mm-hmm. So when you tell him, who are your witnesses? Give us who are the eyewitnesses. He will take you to a place where it is difficult to verify. So he tells you, he gives you one of a person who's dead. Mm-hmm. So how do you verify? An eyewitness. And then he tells you, and then somebody very far, maybe in the Bahamas, you know? And those days, I'm sure when this proverb came into place, the telephones were not there, the planes were not there. So anazungusha watu anaambia wewe sema nani aliona hii? Atasema fulani fulani.
Tulikuwa na fulani.
Na huyo fulani ukiangalia ni mtu aliaga zamani sana.
Yuko.
Ukimwambia huyu mtu ameaga nakwambia okay, fulani mwingine ambaye yako mbali sana. So Benlo ninte ninder. Ninte means a guy who's dead, and there means somebody who's very far
away.
He makes those to be his eyewitnesses.
Interesting one. Your book, you have basically given us a book that is 32 chapters long. And you've broken it down into, you know, various chapters, and where you tell it in different ways. And Ndu, your first reaction after reading this book, you know, when you first told me, okay, I've read the book. Yeah. What was it that you said?
The first thing I said to Eric, I said, this reminds me of the person who gives you the details of I went to and I saw and I went to and I saw and
I participated.
And I participated and I was there. And, you know, for me, the prose was a story, like storytelling. And I was like, wow, okay. It's an account. It's a recount of events. But then when you look beyond the words, there's a deeper story there. It didn't really matter what chapter you were in. And I mean, as we look at these 32 chapters, every one of them, from when you were a young boy to where you are now, was a recount of things. You were right there. And then again, I was like, this is not just a fly on the wall situation. And when we, in the Kenyan context, think about politicians, we think about those who are just hopping from one place to another, trying to go for their expediency. But this for me then was like, these are experiences.
Yeah.
And they're decisions that are being fueled by these experiences. And it's a little bit deeper than what we see on the outside.
Yes.
Actually, a lot deeper than what we see on the outside.
It's quite deep in how, how the story is being told.
Yeah.
In the way you've told it, one and to the other. It was interesting that you chose the words that you chose for your prologue.
The prologue was interesting. We discussed that as
immediate
well.
first page of the prologue is where you talk about a meeting that was taking place in Naivasha. And you had a long day of
The
meeting.
prologue is
in
long, but
Naivasha.
the meeting in Naivasha, in the wee hours of the night,
In the wee hours of the night, and what you
attracted
hear.
attention of many people.
This, I'm sure, has sold a couple of copies for you in how you tell this particular story. I don't want to read it out, but what was this meeting that was taking place in Naivasha? What was it about?
That was the first parliamentary group meeting of the then powerful ODM party after sharing power under the National Accord. That was our first. Those who became ministers, those who became assistant ministers, and the whole leadership, led by the Prime Minister.
Yeah.
We went for the first parliamentary group meeting. So there were those who wanted to become ministers, they lost that chance. There are those who are now assistant ministers. There are those who are dejected. A number of us were saying, why can't we stay in the opposition benches? Why are we going? We think we won this election. Why are we going for Nusum Kate? We can bring down this government because we have the numbers. Why are we sharing power with people who stole our elections? So there was a lot of discussion. So we had to have a PG, and it started around 6 p.m. for 2 days. So that we went. So it was one of the memorable moments. Anyang Nyong Professor Anyang Nyong was our Secretary General. Henry Kosgei was our chairman. So it was the first time we came face to face with the top leadership of ODM after the post-election violence, after the Kofi Annan story, and after the Kibaki and Raila formed their grand coalition government. Of those who are saying even the ministries were given, these are leftovers. Again, Kibaki has changed. So it was a very different people had came with different ideas and concerns to that PG. So, but that prologue, that section you're talking about is after the meeting, after the dinner, and everybody went back to his room. That's where I started my story.
It was a very interesting start, that's true. And I think it drew a lot of people in, not just in terms of the details of, what was happening at the periphery of this meeting,
Yes.
but then also what is then probably habitual for lots of people. If I can take a few steps back, first of all, I think that it is extremely important that we as Africans write. I think that we don't write enough. I think that a lot of what we see in books has been given to us by people. A lot of the books that we read or have read in the past have come to us from non-Africans. So every time that another African writes, we do a lot for our history.
Yes.
And I think that every time we have a further contribution towards writing, it is something that must be lauded. So I think we could take that opportunity to congratulate you for that as we add to it. But then the question is, why did you decide to write this book with these details? You could have written about anything. You could have written about anything, but you chose to talk about lawmaking and leadership in Kenya. Why did you do that?
Yes, I think that's a very fair question. This book, if you read from the first page to the last page, 371 pages, the period is between, let me say, 2002, a bit 2003, but from 2005, the orange versus banana referendum, till August, this election, of last election. So that's a huge, it's a long time in terms of the time frame. And this is a time when I spent my entire life in that period in the political class. So that's why politics and leadership comes in. And during this period, I think half of it, I was the leader of majority. So what was I doing? I was the anchor and the person in charge of lawmaking and also government agenda in the legislature, whether it's bills, sessional paper, treaties, motions, statements. So that's why I picked on that title. But you know, after, and I think there's a chapter in this book called The 22 Minutes.
Yeah.
You know, I was a leader of majority for close to 8 years. And that was abruptly ended in 22 minutes meeting of a parliamentary group meeting at KICC. So when I went home that night, and the following days and the following weeks, I realized I had a lot of free time because the office of the leader of majority is a very, very busy office. So I had a lot of free time and I had a lot of energy. And I think, of course, with friends, I decided to write a book. One thing that helped me out to today is every day, at the end of the day, before I go to bed, I spend about 20, 30 minutes to recap the main events of my life. Even today when I go back, I'll say I was here and we discussed this and jot it down and put it somewhere. So it was easier for me to recollect, sit. I think before I came to the final copy, and I want to thank you and say that I had a very, very good editorial team. You know, I had about 10 files of this book. And from the first one to the 10th one, we're making corrections, adding, subtracting. So I had a very, very, and I don't think anybody will find an error in this book. And I want to thank that editorial team. Of course, I had the editorial team, the design team, my good lawyer who made sure that from the copyright to everything, we make sure we anchor it in law. So I decided to write this book. But before I wrote this book, I read 3 books. Very, very books, and I'll ask you good people to read. One was by John Bolton, the former national security advisor of Donald Trump. He wrote a book just after he left office, and it's called The Room Where It Happened. You know, basically how the statecrafts and bureaucrats run government in the U.S. and more so during Trump. Then I read another book, because you remember that period where when I left office, there was this issue of deep state systems. So there was a book written by a New York newspaper, New York Times, a famous columnist called Mike, I think, Fulgram. He wrote a book, a very interesting book, and a friend sent me from the US called The Deep State, the Fall of the Constitution, and Creation of Shadow Government. It's a very interesting book. So I read that because I wanted to know what is this deep state. So I read that book. And finally, then I read a book by former Prime Minister of the UK, David Cameron, on the same title, for the record. Then with that, and I had to tell my story. You know, as you said, I think the Kenyan political class, particularly top leadership, William Ruto, Raila Odinga, Uhuru Kenyatta, Mwai Kibaki, and the second tier, they have a lot about. You know, people talk about former Prime Minister participated in the Constitution, he's a reformist, he's a Democrat. You know, he's the one who gave us all these good things we're enjoying, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. But that must be written. Yeah? For generations, for our children to see. So I think I have set the ball rolling. It's not a very popular book with some of the chapters. When you read the chapter on... he bought my book yesterday. I didn't tell him that he has a chapter in my book, The Honorable Musalia Mudavadi, Deal or No Deal. You remember that period Musalia became our flag bearer in Jubilee. I think it was 2 weeks. Then there's a chapter on my very good now friend and the same coalition, Anwar Guru, on You Have Touched a Life Wire, on the NYS mega scandal. Of course, what is in the headline, Kenyans today can read that, and Kalonzo cannot deny. Most of 100% of what I've said here, I dare them deny. It's an actual account
of what happened.
Of what happened today. The headline, it's true. Kalonzo said that. So
let's go into what Kalonzo said, because this is what you say, that there was at that time before the election of 2013.
2013, yes.
And in the run-up to that election, there's a whole issue of, the Hague, Uhuru has been indicted, Ruto has been indicted, and the journey towards this election and what ought to happen. And then there's a conversation that takes place with Kalonzo Musyoka. What was that conversation? Where was it taking place, and what was it about?
The period between 2007 elections, post-election violence, Kofi Annan, Grand Coalition government, it flows down to the 2010 Constitution. And the 2010 Constitution, I dare say it, was lately at the far end was influenced by the political scenario then. Everybody agreed on a parliamentary system. But because Uhuru and Ruto were at the ICC, and they were very credible potential candidates for 2013 general elections, there was a feeling that we must take over government. Okay, we must unite. We must form a coalition. And we must deny Raila Odinga the presidency. So there was this team of the late Joe Saitoti, Uhuru Kenyatta, and Kalonzo Musyoka in one corner in PNU. Then there was the ODM of Raila Odinga and the rebels, then led by William Ruto and myself and many of us who were, one time they called us in this book, you see, they called us rebels, they called us remnants, and many terminology. So there was a G7, you remember, of Kalonzo Musyoka, George Saitoti, Wamala was somewhere in a corner, and Uhuru Kenyatta, preparing themselves for 2013. But Kalonzo Musyoka and George Saitoti, as they were talking to Uhuru Kenyatta, they were also, Saitoti was a member of the subcommittee, cabinet subcommittee on ICC. Yeah. And both of them, in fact, in my book, you see, we met Saitoti at one time with William Ruto, and he said, you guys, in the event you are indicted by the ICC and you can't stand, William Ruto, I'm a pastoralist. I'm a Maasai on one end. And on the other side of the coin, I am called Mudengi. I can appeal to the voters in Mulima, Kenya. So can I be your candidate? So Kalonzo Musyoka, as he was doing this story today, shattered diplomacy on behalf of Kibaki to save Ruto and Uhuru, but at the back of his mind, he didn't mind these two characters going to the Hague because there was an opportunity there for him. So there was that confusion. So at one time, when the indictees now was properly announced, and now there were 6 Kenyans who were facing the ICC, we grappled with a number of options. One option was, can we support one candidate who, when he forms government, he can look into our issues. A government that will support the 2 candidates on their case in ICC. So Kalonzo Musyoka was an option, Saitoti was an option. Of course, Raila was not an option. He was not on the table. There was a feeling, and I think to some extent it was true, that Raila was working with his international partners, the Western governments. Choices have consequences. So the new kid that the West was pushing was Raila Odinga. So Raila was not an option. So one evening, after we formed now URP and TNA, these are now new parties that came to the space. And we realized that William Ruto alone cannot win. Uhuru Kenyatta alone cannot win. What do we do? Then we formed an alliance of URP, TNA. On one side, we were struggling with IC, the other side, we were saying, how do we form? So one evening in their drives, there was an idea now. And that's why even the one of Mudavadi came in and they went to Kalonzo's home and they said, man, we want to give you the seat, but we must agree. You take the presidential, Uhuru becomes your running mate, William Ruto becomes the leader of majority, we share government, 33%. And, but we have these demands. I mean, we are facing a serious issue. As we are coming to give it to you as a good friend of ours, in the event this ICC story becomes complicated, we have a government that can do
is friendly to us.
yes. And you know, Kalonzo by nature, if you ask me, because I have worked with him in the 10th parliament. He was the vice president. He was the leader of government business in parliament. Somebody I know very well. Kalonzo is very casual in his talk. Even when he talks on TV, you see what do I pick? What you guys call the bites, the news bites. So Kalonzo just said, you know, I am a senior counsel. Okay, you guys, and both of you are not lawyers. Your case is not that bad. You know, I have studied Ocampo's papers and evidence. Okay, and you guys first you confirmed you guys you'll be jailed. Yeah, and you'll be jailed for not that much, but 10 years.
Yeah.
You know, you should have said 8 years. You should have said even 11 years. He pegged on the term of a president.
2 terms.
2 terms.
So while you're away,
So he said, "Oh, you guys, 10 years, I'll be the president, and when you come back, I'll hand over to you." So so what's wrong if you're in jail for 10 years? That infuriated most of the former president. He walked away and he went outside the gazebo and started puffing his cigarettes. And he left William with this guy, with this serious senior counsel.
and where were you at this time, and what were you thinking?
In fact, they left us at our strategy meeting.
So you were not in this room.
No. So when they came back, and they were in their own car, so we asked William, "What happened?" And William said, "You guys, something serious has happened." No, Kalonzo said, and Kalonzo later confirmed to me. You know, I think after they left, he realized the blunder. He said, so he called a number of us. He said, "You guys, what happened?" We told him, "You said this." He said, "Yeah, but how can we do damage control?" And that, by the way, led to the following day that we decided we present Uhuru Kenyatta as a candidate. Of course, after that, we went into the coalition, and I think I looked for it, the coalition agreement between TNA of Uhuru Kenyatta and URP of William Ruto. That thing, I think, after we formed government in 2013, somebody decided to shred it. Because that agreement, I think, should be given to the people of Kenya. But I know the content, you know. We shared power.
So who kept it? Of course, there were 2 copies.
I think there were 2 copies.
There's a
I think
TNA copy
the two of them
and
kept
the URP copy. They were signed by the chairperson of the 2 parties. Your chairman in URP was the former speaker.
No, I think the 2 principals kept it.
The 2 principals kept it.
Because even later, you know, there was another agreement by Najib Balala and by Charity Ngilu to our coalition. They didn't bring anything. I think Balala's party was called the Republican Party. Even didn't win 1 MCA. But you know, Balala and I think I said it in my book. Balala and Charity Ngilu are the most crafty politicians. They jump ship. They know where government is forming. So they must be in government. This is the only government they are not in since 2002. Yeah. So, but you know, the hallmark of that agreement, TNA URP, cabinet was shared, ministerial position was shared.
It was 50-50.
Even in parliament, William Ruto took the deputy president, he took the leader of majority in the National Assembly, which I took over from, which I took as a URP member, who had to take the deputy speaker in the National Assembly, the speaker of the Senate. That's how Uhuru became. And then even if you go to government, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Energy, and many others.
So this is how it ended.
So the story about Kalonzo is very